An unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 billion kalpas. Having it to see and listen to, remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's teachings. In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understandings of their teachings and practice, it is offered freely as a practice of dana paramita. And dana is a Pali word, which means generosity, or to give freely, and this is done without the expectation of anything in return when the opportunity arises. And those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a dana basis, so you can support their practice by giving what you can by going to greattreetemple.org and clicking the donate button. And our speaker today is the abbess of Great Tree, Rev Teijo Munnich. Daiju Teijo means Great Tree Right Stillness. And Rev Teijo is a disciple and Dharma heir of Rev Dainin Katagiri. She studied with him from 1975 until his death in 1990, receiving formal training at Hokyoji in Minnesota, Tassajara Zen Mountain Center in California, and Hosshinji Sodo in Obama, Japan. Rev Munnich was ordained as a Zen priest in 1981. And in 1983, she began to envision a practice center and community, at its heart, a residential practice for women. And this came to be Great Tree. Teijo is speaking to us from Minnesota today. And the title of her talk is A Path with No Trace.
Well, good morning. Yes, I'm in Minnesota for my brother's 80th birthday party. And it's already started, so I don't know how coherent this talk is going to be, but I'll give it a shot. We've been reading the commentary by Okumura Roshi about the Mountains and Water Sutra by Dogen Zenji, and simultaneously we've been preparing for this mountain seat ceremony that's happening in the fall. And as Koenzan mentioned when he gave his talk, the monk's life begins with ordination, and then they have a relationship with their teacher, and at a certain point, and that teacher ordains them, and then they go to the mountains, and that means going to the monastery for a period of time. And then when they leave the monastery, kind of going out into the marketplace, and that's kind of the second stage, in a sense. I say the marketplace, he didn't say the marketplace, but to me that's what it's like when you leave the monastery. You know, you learn a lot about yourself in the monastery, and it's not easy to be there, but it's a lot easier to be in the monastery that with people that are of like mind and with a schedule that kind of keeps you in a certain kind of awareness than it is to get out into the marketplace where you're kind of pulled in every direction. And so anyway, that's the real test of your practice. And then the last, well, not the last, but when you take on kind of the role of a teacher or the role of the head of a temple or a monastery, then that's a return to the mountain. And as he said, it's becoming the mountain. So for me, this has been kind of a koan, the idea of what it means to become the mountain. And this book that we're reading by Okumura Roshi about the Mountains and Water Sutra has a section in it, which is chapter 4 of this book, which talks about becoming the mountain. And so it's chapter 4, but this is only what I'm going to be talking about today is only from the very first section of chapter 4. And I'm not even sure I'm going to be able to talk about all of it. So I might have to have another talk about this, but hopefully you'll get some idea of what this is about. And for me, it's really a challenge because on the one hand, I think any of us that has done Zazen, that has spent any amount of time meditating, has experienced this letting go that allows us to become one with life. And this is really what the sutra is pointing to, using the mountain as an image. But again, when we get off the cushion and we have to interact with other people, everything starts to change, and it's easy for us to forget that experience of interconnection, and we start seeing ourselves in relationship to others. And do they like me? Do they not like me? Are they mad at me? Are they today? What is going on in this relationship? There's always that kind of mental discrimination. And, it all points back to it's all about me, which is really not the path of, what's the name of this talk? The path of
Path with no trace.
The path with no trace, yeah. And the path with no trace is just another way of saying becoming the mountain. So I'm not going to start at the beginning of this section. I'm just going to start with a quote by Dogen. Wise men, and I put and women, and sages have all made the mountains their own chambers, their own body and mind. And though these wise men and sages, and through these wise men and sages, the mountains have appeared. Wise men and women and sages have all made the mountains their own chambers, their own body and mind. And through these wise men and sages, the mountains have appeared. Jogu does a breakdown of this word appeared in Japanese, which I'm not going to go into right now, but ultimately his description of it is, he says, appeared means eternal truth manifested at this moment in concrete form. So through these wise people and sages, the mountains have appeared. Appeared means eternal truth manifested at this moment in concrete form. And I think eternal truth is pointing to the interdependent connection, the interdependent nature of life. So through these mountains, through these wise people and sages, the mountains have appeared. This is eternal truth manifesting at this moment in concrete form. And Okamura goes on to say, Buddhas and ancestors have been dwelling within the mountains and manifesting the true reality of the mountains through their practice. By saying the mountains have appeared, Dogen is talking about the way people actualize the virtue of the mountains and waters through their lives. However many great sages and wise men we suppose have assembled in the mountains, ever since they entered the mountains, no one has met a single one of them. This is no trace. There is only the expression of the mountain way of life. Not a single trace of their having entered remains. And this is, I think I talked about a lot of this in a prior lecture, but I don't remember when that was. But he goes on to talk about Dongshan. See if I can find that section. Oh, it says, when Dogen says, not a single trace of their having entered remains, he refers to what Dongshan said about the way of birds. Migratory birds know where they are going every year, but humans can't see their path. Although we don't see their flyway, the birds know it, even though the traces don't last. The masters are like birds with no trace we can see. Nonetheless, the birds can find their path. I was thinking about when I was teaching at Warren Wilson, I used to take my dog Daisy to class with me. And sometimes I would leave her in the classroom because I'd have to run somewhere and, get some copies made of something. And the students didn't pay too much attention to what she was doing in the classroom. So sometimes she would go looking for me, and she would always find me by sniffing the ground, no matter where I went. And I could not see that scent at all. But dogs can find things through the scent. So this kind of traceless path is, it's the same as becoming the mountain. That somehow there's a path to follow, even though there's no footsteps. There's no discernible path. Through this practice, we are drawn to this path of the sages, of those who have completely given themselves over to the mountains. And I'm not sure that this happens in a very consistent way in human life. We can experience it, and of course what Dogen is doing is he's pointing to this possibility. We can experience this through our practice, through our the letting go that always happens during Zazen, even if it's our very first time. Sometimes beginner's mind there's more letting go, but noticing what we're doing with our minds while we're sitting on the cushion. And when we notice it, there's a kind of letting go and experiencing all beings, experiencing the interconnection of that we live within. This is what this mountain represents. And Dogen mentions at various points in this sutra how the mountain is not something stable. He talks about the mountain flowing, and we were talking about this in the group about how you don't usually think about how that a mountain flows. You kind of assume that you understand how water flows, but how do we think of a mountain flowing? When I studied geology in college, though, I started to recognize that mountains are not as unmoving as we think. So when I first encountered, because they're constantly being eroded and changed, and if you look at a mountain over thousands of years, you see changes. And and the difference, for example, between the mountains in California and the mountains in North Carolina, which are the oldest mountains in the world. The mountains in California are higher, but they're also sharper, and they break. So mountains do have different qualities depending on their conditions and their age and various things. People disappear and become the mountain. Dogen is saying that once those sages and Buddhas enter the mountains, they disappear by becoming one with the mountains. The mountain refers to the entire network of interdependent origination. These masters completely become knots in Indra's net. And as I said, I'm not sure that this is something that even masters master, even what are called masters master. I met this woman by the name of Maylee Scott, who came to Hokyoji for a practice period. She was practicing in California, and there were a whole group of California people that came one year for the practice period at our monastery in southern Minnesota. And Mei Li and I, we kind of became friends, and then we didn't see each other very often over the years. But over the years, she became ordained, and then she got cancer and died. And I happened to be in San Francisco when they were doing her memorial service. And part of that memorial service was that people could ask questions. There were just a few people that were kind of designated that could ask questions. And Mel Weitzman from the Berkeley Zen Center was officiating. And one of the questions was, why am I feeling Mei Li? Why, I don't remember what her Dharma name was, but why am I feeling her more now than when she was alive? And Mel Weitzman said, it's because she's gotten out of her own way. And I think that we can do this through our Zazen practice. We can get out of our own way. In other words, we can let go of those things that are obstacles to our being able to not get caught by our self-centeredness, it's all about me-ness. But we keep getting pulled back, even if we're not, even when we're in the monastery, we have the problem of getting caught by the various issues that we have that come up through discrimination. For example, one time somebody said something that hurt my feelings, and I didn't respond. I didn't say, oh, you hurt my feelings. I kind of suppressed that feeling, and it turned into anger. And that's the kind of thing that we do all the time. And we don't even notice that we're doing it. So having a kind of awareness, like we can have actually during Zazen, to have an awareness of this is something that we can take into our everyday life, and we can recognize the circumstances around something, and by recognizing that it doesn't have that hold on us, and we can let go of it. And to me, this is the path of path without a trace. This is and we experience it in moments, and sometimes it sustains, we kind of get into the flow, but other things will get triggered, other things that are karmic issues that have come up in our lives through our various experiences and our various ways of understanding life that we attach to. Trace is a translation of the expression shoseki. Shoseki is like a footprint. When we see the footprints, we know that someone walked in this path. Dogen talks about sages who did not leave such any such trace. They had so completely entered the mountains that they became the mountains. Their footprints are nothing other than the mountains themselves. If we love the mountain's way of life, even without footprints, still we see the traces of the master's way of life. When the Zen masters who entered the mountains became the mountains, their self-centered way of life and karmic consciousness disappeared as they merged with the mountains. Only a traceless trace of their mountain way of life remains. I was thinking about how, and somewhere in here he talks about self-centeredness, and self-centeredness has always been such an obscure thing to me because it's hard to kind of describe what it is, but I sort of have had an insight recently, about how we all we want to be seen. And that wanting to be seen is a form of dukkha. We're kind of grasping onto this I that we have a sense of, that we define, that we believe to be substantial and real, and we don't see ourselves as constantly changing and being part of a constantly changing network, so-called life. One of the things that Okamura Roshi talks about is about that net of Indra. I'll kind of mention it. The net of Indra is a way in Buddhism that describes the interdependent relationship that we live within. He says, these masters completely became knots in Indra's net. Then the knots disappear. The masters disappear. Only the net remains. This is the meaning of becoming the mountain. So this net is a vast, infinite kind of structure that has a jewel, or has a jewel, a reflection. Well, sometimes it's a mirror. It's described as a mirror, but this jewel has many facets, and it's reflecting all the other jewels. So one of the things something that I found as a description of this that I think was very helpful. Indra's net is a philosophical and cosmological metaphor, particularly within Mahayana Buddhism, describing the interconnectedness of all things in the universe, an infinite net, each intersection containing a jewel that reflects all other jewels, demonstrating the interdependence of all phenomena. And then, as Okamura says, when we become the mountain, at those times when we become the mountain, the jewel disappears and only the net exists. So even the jewel can be a perception of something solid. So when we become the mountain, we become the net itself, and we can't identify ourselves even as the jewel that can see the other jewels. When the Zen masters who entered the mountains became the mountains, their self-centered way of life and karmic consciousness disappeared as they merged with the mountains. Only a traceless trace of their mountain way of life remains. Mountain way of life, being one with Buddhas, is nothing abstract, but simply daily activities, like a household. A Buddha carries water and collects firewood. A Buddha prepares meals. A Buddha washes the oryoki bowls. That is the mountain style of life. So, sometimes you hear this expression, this Zen expression, when it's time to eat, just eat. When it's time to sleep, just sleep. I met a monk by the name of Tsugen Narasaki Roshi. He was a friend of Katagiri Roshi's, and he had become a monk when he was a young child. And he came to Minnesota several times, and I ended up kind of being his chauffeur and his person to, Japanese people like to see things when they go places. So I took him around to see like Minnehaha Falls in Minneapolis and some of the beautiful parts of Minneapolis. And so he came several times. He actually was the person that performed Katagiri Roshi's funeral. So I had many interactions with him, but, and I always felt something from him, even though he was just kind of a nondescript guy that you would usually not even pay very much attention to. And one time when I went to Japan, I went to a place in Kyushu with the name of Shogoji, for a practice period, and it was the first practice period. And so several of us from Minnesota Zen Center went, and so they had us come to Shikoku, to a temple there, which he was connected with and eventually became the abbot of. And he escorted us on this boat to the island of Kyushu. And then we took a train, and then we took, way out in the mountains to get to the monastery. But it was an overnight big ship. I don't know what you call it, a ferry kind of, but it was an overnight thing. And so we had bunks, for sleeping and everything. And I was very excited about this boat because it even had a gift shop. it was huge. And I really wanted to go visit the gift shop. And when it was time to go to bed, and Tsugen Roshi was his place to sleep was in the same section. And they had curtains and everything. And when it was time to go to bed, I don't know why, but it really impressed me. He just went to bed when it was time to go to bed. And I thought, oh, that I just was so, I thought he's a real monk. There was something about his doing that just affected me so deeply. Of course, I went and visited the gift shop anyway, but it did touch me in a way where I really felt, and I thought about this when it was talking about, that it's the mountain way of life is just the Buddha carries water and collects firewood and prepares meals to just, when it's time to carry the water, just carry the water, but it takes a certain kind of awareness of that moment. And even though Tsugen Roshi kind of touched me and brought me to that awareness, it wasn't complete enough. I hadn't embodied it. But having the awareness of the moment and what is needed in that moment and just acting, this is the path with no trace. This is becoming the mountain. Dogen Zenji goes on to say, the crown and eyes of the mountains are completely different when we are in the world gazing off at the mountains and when we are in the mountains meeting the mountains. The crown and eyes of the mountains are completely different when we are in the mountains gazing off at the mountains and when we are in the mountains meeting the mountains. Okamura goes on to describe this as, in the beginning of Sansui Kyo is the Mountains and Waters Sutra, Dogen says that there is no such place as outside the mountains. And yet, until we awaken to that truth, we are blind to being the person in the mountains, and we imagine we are observers from the outside. This is a description of discrimination. There is no such place as outside the mountains. We're always within that interdependent connection of all beings. I say all beings. It says all phenomena in this description I found. However you see it, it's that, I talk about the giving and receiving of Jiji Zanmai. Jiji Zanmai is the joy of that, the experience of that connection, that giving and receiving that Dogen talks about in the Bendo Wa is a description of what life actually is. We are constantly giving and receiving. And how we give and how we receive affects everything in that net. So if I'm in a bad mood, it affects people around me, and they affect people around them, and they affect people around them. And maybe even the little animals become grouchy, It's always interesting to watch Stella, She's always kind of watching me and trying to figure out what she's supposed to be doing or how she's supposed to be responding to things. Stella, is my dog. And but we don't generally do that. We see a situation, and maybe she does this too, but we kind of make a judgment about what's going on, or sometimes we don't even see the situation. We just react based on our karmic history or on our mood on that day, and we don't take a breath and step back and just get a feeling of what's going on. Stepping back to me means just, even for a moment, letting go of our condition in that moment that might be driving us in a particular direction. So I talk about letting go a lot, and of course it's not something we can do, so it's a difficult idea to imagine. What does that mean? But it happens to us in Zazen. We do let go. We notice something. Oh my gosh, my mind is busy, or or I'm angry, or we notice things when we sit down. Sometimes we don't notice things. So it's a perfect opportunity to understand how awareness works. And at first, when we first start sitting, I experienced that I wasn't noticing that happening. And of course, you don't notice it when it's happening. But the more you do, and maybe you dismiss the experience of letting go itself because we don't recognize it. But the longer we sit, the more familiar that experience becomes. And you find yourself kind of looking back and saying, wow, that happened. And then you start giving it some credibility. And then when it's happening, I notice that if I'm angry and I sit down on the cushion, of course, the first impulse is, I don't want to sit here. This is uncomfortable. But I know from my experience that that's the best time to be sitting there. And of course, we still can't figure out what's going on or what to do about it when we get angry, because the anger kind of consumes us. But just to take a breath and let go of that anger, it comes back and we do it again, and it comes back and we do it again. But each time that we let go of it, it has less of a hold on us. And that experience of recognizing and letting go, that's the path with no trace. Dogen says if we don't have the eye to see the mountains, we are outside. So we aren't outside, actually, because we're part of life. But when we don't have the awareness, he says, to see the mountains, to recognize the mountains, then we are outside the mountains. So that's what outside the mountains means. We separate ourselves in our minds. And of course, this is the nature of discrimination. And that's one of the reasons why, the human condition is to discriminate. And that's how we survive. We couldn't survive in human life without discrimination. But that's why I as I alluded to with Maylee Scott, it's not really until after death that we can completely get out of our own way. And the Tibetan Book of the Dead, what it's talking about during the bardo of death, it even talks about how we need to get out of our own way in death. So, even without that human issue of discrimination, apparently, our consciousness or our mind is still working as long as we have this physical body. So, this is all very kind of, all I'm doing is talking about it. I can't say I really can understand it, but that trace that the ancestors have left for us, kind of is, it puts out there the possibility, and it puts out there, and Dogen talks about it. You know, he's very clear in his own awareness. You know, when I read Dogen, I'm not always so clear, but the longer I practice, the more some of his understanding is recognizable to me, even if it's not something that I am so good at. So Dogen says, if we don't have the eye to see the mountains, we are outside. This doesn't mean that we are actually outside the mountains. There is no border between the mountains and the world. The world is part of the mountains. However, unless we really enter the mountains, enter the reality of life, we cannot see the reality of life. To me, what entering this reality of life is talking about is what happens when we sit down on the cushion. We see things as they are. We experience things as they are. That's why sometimes we get excited on the cushion. Maybe we have a brilliant idea and we want to jump up and do it. And sometimes we feel sadness and then we want to jump up and leave because we don't like that. Sometimes we feel, and a lot of times these are things that we don't really understand. We just have a feeling. So seeing the reality of life is to just be with it and to just be willing to recognize it in a different way. And what that recognition is seeing that all of the things that give us angst or all of the things that we get excited about are just things that we've created with our own mind. And they really don't have any substantial existence. And recognizing that immediately, this is letting go. This is a kind of letting go. And so not getting caught by our thoughts and our perceptions and our ideas, but letting that go and letting life in, letting ourselves see the non-substantiality of the things that we've created with our minds, and seeing that we've created it with our minds. Entering the mountains, this is again Okumura. Entering the mountains means starting a practice, arousing Bodhi mind, taking Bodhisattva vows, studying Buddha's teaching, practicing Zazen, and performing day-to-day activities. It's interesting to me that he says starting to practice, and then he says arousing Bodhi mind, because Bodhi mind is often talked about as the way-seeking mind, and it's talked about as what causes us to come to practice, bodhicitta, awakened mind. So when we awaken to, our failure, when we call it failure, it's letting go of what it is that we were trying to get or trying to achieve. And so when we notice that my life is a mess and I failed, this is what brings a lot of us to this practice. Or, that things in our lives, even though they're working exactly as we imagined, are not satisfying us. This is what causes us to seek a spiritual practice, because we recognize that it's something beyond our understanding. So bodhicitta, bodhi mind, is the awakened minds that actually brings us to this practice. But then, even though we've been brought to the practice, we don't always recognize that we have to continue with this, and otherwise we can easily fall back into some of those old patterns, and we have to kind of recognize all of the things that have caused us to think in a particular way, or to consider something as a failure when maybe it's just a way of opening our lives to see life in a bigger way. So it seems to me like he said, when he says arousing Bodhi mind, maybe he's talking about, and it comes after starting the practice. What occurred to me is that, well, we've already aroused Bodhi mind to get there, but maybe we haven't aroused it. Maybe it just kind of came up, and we were, because we felt like a failure, we felt like I need something, and maybe spiritual practice will give me something new to hold on to. So that's not really fully arousing Bodhi mind, maybe. I don't know. So he starts with starting a practice. Entering the mountains means starting a practice, arousing Bodhi mind, taking Bodhisattva vows. So once we've really begun to arouse Bodhi mind, when we practiced for a while, we start to notice that we really need this practice. And the Bodhisattva vows are vows that cause us to go beyond what we think we can do, by directing us to the fact that all beings, that we are interconnected with all beings, and that we should not just see things from our own perspective. We need to see ourselves in relationship with, rather than relationship to, rather than discriminating and putting ourselves separate from all beings. To recognize that oneness is really arousing Bodhi mind, and that causes us to see the need for receiving the Bodhisattva precepts. And those Bodhisattva precepts, the heart of the Bodhisattva precepts is the third pure precept, I think. In Dogen's tradition, that's called to embrace and benefit all beings. That's kind of the heart of the Bodhisattva precepts. It includes the three refuges, returning to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. The three pure precepts of avoiding that which is called evil, or avoiding what is unwholesome, to do what is wholesome, and to embrace and benefit all beings. And then the 10 what are called prohibitory precepts, the things that we should try to avoid, and maybe even try to turn around into more positive actions, such as not killing would be giving life. So looking at these 10 prohibitory precepts from the perspective of embracing and benefiting all beings. And this returning to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha is a way of also, and taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha is a way of also recognizing the way to embrace and benefit all beings. So starting to practice arousing Bodhi mind, taking Bodhisattva vows, studying Buddha's teachings, practicing Zazen, and performing day-to-day activities. These are seeing the mountains from inside. Let's see what time it is. It's 9:52, and so I think that I probably said enough. And undoubtedly someone else has something to add, so I'm going to open things up. Thank you.
Teijo, when you were talking about Indra's net, and you were I can't remember exactly, but you were connecting the idea of Indra's net with sort of like self-centeredness, or the desire to be seen. And I think I was wondering if it was sort of, if you meant that, like, people try to do things to be seen. They take actions that are self-centered in order to make themselves stand out. But I was wondering if what you meant by that metaphor was sort of like because you're part of Indra's net, you're seen without even doing anything. You're reflected without needing to do anything extra. Or I don't know if I misunderstood what you were trying to say.
Yeah, I think Indra's net is just a way of describing that relationship. And I guess what I was saying is that the jewels represent each one of us, but each one of us is reflecting everybody else, and they're reflecting us. And so that's kind of the description that is usually used for Indra's net. But what I was trying to say, I think, is that this wanting to be seen is self-centeredness. Wanting not just to do big things to be seen, but just to be seen to be loved by someone else, or to be loved by those around us, and to be appreciated by those around us. This is really a kind of self-centeredness, though it's nice. But that when we let go of doing things in order to feed our own need to be loved, that's when the jewel actually disappears, and only the net remains. And then we just act out of the awareness of our relationship with all beings, and we act from the place of what is most beneficial for others, rather than how are other people seeing me. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
There was one part where you said that, like, I think it was that when the sages like when a wise person becomes a mountain, like no one has like ever met them.
Mm-hmm.
And that part interests me a lot. And maybe after that it said something about, but they'll like see the mountain or something. It was like they don't, once they have fully become the mountain, no one has ever met them, but they'll see the mountain. And that interests me a lot, because I feel like with Dogen, it's like somehow like I weirdly, like, probably everyone feels like this. It's like you're like, yeah, that's true, but like you don't really know why it's true. Like it's just like it feels like it like dissolves into you, and you're like, but you like don't really know what it means. But that part interests me a lot. I don't know.
Me too. I love that part. Yeah, I understand what you mean. In fact, I was thinking about that this morning. I was thinking about how I read these. Like yesterday, I actually copied this whole section by hand, because sometimes when I use more of my senses, it penetrates more, And as I was writing it, it was just like the very first time I read it, and I've read this section so many times. I was like, oh yes, this is it. This is, but then this morning I was thinking about how I was going to talk about it, and I was like, I can't talk about this. I don't understand it. But I know exactly what you're saying, Wilma. It's just, it just kind of speaks to you. And at the same time, it's like, wait, what does that mean? That's why I admire Shohaku for being able to talk about this and to be able to describe it. I'm like, wow, even he is a little hard to understand. So thank you for saying that, Mama. I think that's a really important thing to realize with Dogen. Let's see. Oh, it's 8:57, so I guess let's finish up and make some announcements. Thank you all.
Thank you, Teijo. All right, let me pull up the announcements really quick. Okay, well, so I think the registration is closed for now, but there is a children's retreat this Monday, which will just be very exciting to hear about after it's done. On Wednesday, there's a strawberry full moon gathering. And important note about that is that the Mindful Politics group will not be meeting on Wednesday because the full moon gathering is happening. So full moon gathering is happening at 7 p.m. and it'll be on Zoom or in person. And then our speaker for next week is Meredith Mune McIntosh.
Good.
And the title of her talk is 10 Directions, Our Unified Field of Attention. And she's an Alexander technique practitioner. So I'm imagining that something about her talk will have to do with movement and the body, which will be pretty interesting. And then I sent out a newsletter pretty recently about volunteering and work days and things like that. So you should read that to learn more about how we're preparing for the Mountain Seat ceremony. But we're doing work days every Saturday, and then in July we'll be starting work days on Sundays too. So we'll have a meditation, work period, lunch, and then another work period. So if anyone is interested in participating in that, let me know and I'll sign you up for whatever dates you can.
I just want to. Oh, are you done?
I think so.
Okay. I just want to say thank you. You know, I was thinking, oh, this is going to be so crazy trying to give a talk when I'm with my family, but this has really grounded me. So thank you all for coming. We just had an influx of family there was a lot of screaming and stuff. So I was like, oh, I'm so happy to be here with all of you. So thank you. And I hope you have a nice day, everyone. Let's do the giving back the merit.
May the merit of this practice.
May the merit of this practice
Benefit all beings.
benefit all beings.